All right, I have a question for you. What is it that makes you good? Or at least in your mind, what are the things that you turn to convince yourself that you're good, right? Maybe it's your job, what you do for a living, or how you take care of other people. Maybe it's the charities that you're involved with, or the way that you're generous with your time and resources, your gifts. What is it that makes you feel good about yourself? And then I want you to take that question one step further. What is it that you think makes you good with God? In other words, what makes you good in God's eyes? And my hunch is that we wouldn't say that it's right, but oftentimes we use a lot of the same markers to answer both of those questions. I know for me, one of the things that I often am tempted to believe makes me good with God are all the things I do for God, right? All of the videos or the emails or the ways that I serve people or put on it. I'm tempted to think that all of the work that I do with my hands makes me not just good, but good with God. What is it for you? That question, I think, is really getting at the heart of what Paul has been building to and trying to unpack in these first few chapters of Galatians. And this week we turn our attention in part to chapter 2, the latter half of it. And I want to slim down even and focus on the couple of paragraphs between verses 15 all the way down through 21. If you're reading with us in one of these ESV journals, you have a subheading that says justified by faith. If you're reading in the NIV or another translation, you may have something kind of similar there. Justified by faith. What Paul is arguing is, what is it that makes us right with God? And there's definitely a list of things that we're tempted to believe make us right with God, and like what is actually true about what makes us right with God. And this is no argument that's unique to us. This is not a temptation that's unique to us by any means. In fact, for the contemporaries of Paul, what they were tempted to believe made them right with God was the law. Getting circumcised, practicing all the ritual purity laws, the cleanliness laws, not eating with Gentiles was a big piece of that component. And all the food laws too, all of these different things, that how they followed the law was what would make them right and good in God's eyes. And Paul is going to say, no, that ship has sailed. We're so far beyond that. We've come to a new way of doing things. He says in verse 15, we ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners. Okay, he's not trying to be rude to Gentiles, non-Jewish folk. While this sounds rude to our ears, what he's saying is you guys should know better. Everyone talks about the Galatians as these foolish Galatians, these backwater nobodies who live in the sticks. They're nobodies. But who he's talking to, Jews by birth, they held themselves as above such nonsense. They were superior to some degree. And in particular, the Jewish Christians living in Galatia were very pious in their belief. And so what he's saying is not like those Gentile sinners. He's saying, you foolish people, you think that you're so much better than them, then you should know better not to fall into these same traps. If you're so smart and so educated and so up there when it comes to your relationship with God, then you ought to know these things. I hope that makes sense. If not, look at the email. We'll go into more depth on that. He says, yet, even though all this is true, even though we ought to know better, we know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. A person is not justified by what they do with their hands, by the things that we do for God, or even in the name of God. That is not what makes us justified. They're good things. No one's saying that we shouldn't do things for God, right? But if we're tempted to believe that that is how we are saved or made right with God, well, then we've totally gone off the cliff, he says. And I love in verse 18, the picture that he paints here. He says, for if I rebuild what I tore down, I prove myself to be a transgressor. What does he mean by that? Well, I just envision this apocalyptic unveiling moment that he had on the road to Damascus that completely shattered his categories and perceptions and worldview. It was all torn down in a moment. And through the last decade of his ministry and more, he's slowly been rebuilding all of these ideas in light of this truth and this new gospel, this new kingdom that he's found through Jesus. And what he's saying is, I can't go back. I can't rebuild this old thing that I tore down because now we have the truth. What does this look like for you? Since you've been following Jesus, maybe for you that's your whole life, maybe for you that's just a year or less, or maybe you're not even there yet. But I want you to just think about this. What are the things that you've had to tear down? The beliefs about people or yourself or the world at large. What are the ways of seeing the world that you've needed to tear down or shatter, or that the gospel has torn down or reshaped for you? And Jesus is saying you can't go back to those ways of seeing the world now that you have this new kingdom way of living. And then again in verse 20, I think this is one of the more famous passages in Galatians, and it's so beautiful. Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. He says, I have been crucified with Christ. That old way of viewing the world, of doing things, of making decisions, it is dead and gone and buried, and that's where it's going to stay. All of us have now been raised to this new life, this new way of life, this new way of doing things in Jesus. And it is in Jesus that we are made right by God. There's nothing that we can do. There's nothing that we can earn. There's nothing that we need to believe in order to be right with God. We have been made right with God because of who Jesus is. And because of that, we now have this new way of being in the world. And we can't go back to the old way of doing things. How are we made right with God? What does it mean to be right in God's eyes? It means aligning ourselves with this new kingdom reality, this new multi-ethnic family that we're going to be talking about throughout the entire book of Galatians. That's what it means to be right with God. And I just want you to hear this, because this is so important, and this is something I've wrestled with for a really long time. Do you know what that means? If there's nothing that we could do or become or believe to make us right with God, if it really all does hinge on Jesus, which I think it does, that means no matter who you are, what you've done, you are right with God now. Now. There's nothing else you have to do. It is already a gift that has been given to you. The question is, how will you respond to that gift? And do you trust down to the marrow in your bones that that is true for you? That you don't have to earn God's love. You don't have to prove yourself to God. You are loved by God, and he has pulled up a seat to his table with your name on it. And Jesus says, come on, sit by me. You're my sister. You're my brother, and I love you. That is a truth that I've been resting in this week, and I hope it blesses you as well today. Amen.